Let's begin with a question most people are too afraid to ask you directly. How did you survive that? Not the small disappointments. Not the surface level setbacks. I'm talking about the kind of chaos that erases bloodlines. The kind of dysfunction that seeps into children before they even know language. The kind of betrayal that doesn't just hurt, it rewires. You walk through storms that were never meant to produce survivors. You were raised in conditions that were designed to create repetition, not evolution. Most people born into that pattern become it. They inherit it, they defend it, they justify it. Then they pass it down like a cursed heirloom. But you didn't, and that's what unsettles people. You were supposed to break in predictable ways. You were supposed to become reactive, bitter, reckless, addicted to distraction or dependent on validation. That's the usual outcome. That's what the statistics would have predicted. Instead, something else happened. You got quiet, and in that silence, something dangerous started forming. Pain didn't just wound you, it trained you. Every betrayal sharpened your perception. Every moment of abandonment forced you to become self-sufficient. Every time someone underestimated you, something inside you recalibrated. You started observing instead of reacting. You started calculating instead of collapsing. You started remembering. And that's when the shift happened. See, generational destruction works through repetition. Same behaviors, same emotional patterns, same unspoken fears. It keeps people locked in unconscious cycles. They don't even realize they're acting out inherited trauma. But you became conscious. That's the difference. You looked at the pattern and said, "This ends with me." Do you understand how rare that is? Most people don't even question what shaped them. They just become it. They say, "That's just how I am." But you didn't accept that sentence as final. You dissected yourself. You questioned your impulses. You examined your reactions. You studied your own anger. You didn't run from your shadow. You turned toward it. That's not weakness. That's evolution. And evolution threatens systems built on dysfunction. The moment you chose awareness, you disrupted something much bigger than your personal story. You disrupted expectation. You disrupted predictability. You disrupted control. Because broken systems rely on broken participants. When someone heals, when someone becomes intentional, when someone refuses to repeat inherited chaos, it exposes everyone else who didn't. That's why your growth makes certain people uncomfortable. Your discipline highlights their excuses. Your self-control magnifies their impulsiveness. Your boundaries expose their manipulation. They don't know how to categorize you anymore. You're not the wounded version they were familiar with. You're not the reactive personality they could trigger. You're not the naive soul they could guilt. You adapted. You transformed. And now they're watching, trying to figure out what you've become. Here's the truth. You survived what destroys generations because somewhere deep inside you, there was a refusal, a quiet, stubborn refusal to surrender your identity to chaos. You felt the pressure to conform to the narrative, to become the villain, the victim, the statistic. But you resisted, even when it hurt, even when it was lonely, even when nobody applauded. Especially then, survival at that level isn't accidental. It's not luck, it's not coincidence, it's internal defiance. And defiance, when refined, becomes power. You didn't just survive the environment. You studied it. You analyzed it. You learned how dysfunction speaks, how manipulation moves, how insecurity hides behind aggression. You can see patterns now that others miss entirely. That's not paranoia. That's pattern recognition born from experience. You walk into rooms and sense shifts in tone. You hear what people don't say. You notice micro changes in energy. Because you had to. When your survival depended on reading people correctly, your mind adapted. And now you're operating with awareness most people never develop. That's why the question isn't just how you survived. The real question is, who are you now? You're not the frightened version of yourself anymore. You're not the confused child trying to make sense of adult chaos. You're not the desperate person seeking approval. You're someone who endured fire long enough to stop fearing it. And when someone no longer fears the fire that once almost destroyed them, they become something else entirely. They become untouchable in ways that can't be measured. You've seen the worst parts of human behavior. You've witnessed betrayal without warning. You've experienced abandonment without explanation. And yet, here you are, not hardened beyond emotion, not cold beyond recognition, but controlled, measured, aware. That's more dangerous than rage, because rage is predictable. Awareness is not, and this is only the beginning. You survived what was meant to end you, but survival was just the first phase, the real transformation. That's what we're about to uncover. Survival was never the final form. It was the initiation. Most people think making it through the fire is the victory, but they don't understand something crucial. Surviving the storm only proves you can endure it. It doesn't yet reveal who you become because of it. That's where you're different. You didn't just endure. You adapted. At some point, the pain stopped surprising you. The chaos stopped confusing you. The betrayal stopped shocking you. Not because it hurt less, but because you began to expect patterns instead of promises. And that shift, that was evolution. You started seeing people clearly. Not who they pretend to be. Not who they perform as. Not who they claim to be when convenient, but who they are under pressure. You learned that consistency reveals character. You learned that words mean nothing without alignment. You learned that silence can be more revealing than speeches. And once you see clearly, you can't unsee. That's when the loneliness began to feel different. Before, loneliness felt like rejection. Now it feels like filtration. You stopped forcing connections. You stopped over-explaining yourself. You stopped shrinking to maintain access to rooms that never deserved you, and that unsettled people. Because the version of you that tolerated disrespect was easy to manage. The version of you that sets boundaries. That version is harder to manipulate. You became selective, not cold. Selective, not distant, intentional. There's a difference. You started protecting your energy like it was currency, because it is. Every conversation, every reaction, every emotional exchange costs something. And you learn the hard way what it feels like to invest in the wrong places. So now you calculate. You observe before engaging. You listen more than you speak. You respond instead of react, and people feel it. They feel that you're not as accessible as before. They feel that their old tactics don't land the same. They feel that you're no longer desperate to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you. That's power. But here's what they don't see: the discipline behind it. They assume you changed overnight. They don't know about the internal battles. The nights you questioned yourself, the moments you almost reverted, the times you nearly responded impulsively but stopped. They didn't see you practicing restraint. They didn't see you retraining your nervous system. They didn't see you choosing long-term peace over short-term satisfaction. That's why they underestimate the depth of your transformation. From the outside, it looks like detachment. From the inside, it's mastery. You mastered your triggers. You mastered your impulses. You mastered your need to be validated by people who never had the capacity to validate you properly. That's not arrogance. That's emotional independence. And emotional independence threatens control, because once someone no longer needs approval, manipulation loses its leverage. Think about it. How do you guilt someone who has already faced abandonment? How do you intimidate someone who has already survived chaos? How do you shame someone who has already confronted their darkest parts? You can't. That's why certain people are uncomfortable around you now. They can't predict you the way they used to. You don't react where they expect reaction. You don't chase where they expect pursuit. You don't beg where they expect pleading. You stand still, and stillness, when intentional, is intimidating. It signals internal stability. You're not easily moved anymore, not by praise, not by criticism, not by temporary emotions. You've seen how quickly situations flip. You've seen how loyalty dissolves under pressure. You've seen how admiration turns into envy when growth becomes visible. So you don't anchor yourself to external noise anymore. You anchor yourself to awareness, and awareness changes everything. You walk differently now, not physically, energetically. There's a quiet certainty in your movements, a measured presence. You don't rush to prove yourself. You don't rush to explain yourself. You don't rush at all, because you're no longer running from your past. You integrated it. And when someone integrates their past instead of being ruled by it, they become unpredictable in the best way. You're no longer operating from survival mode. You're operating from strategy. That's a dangerous upgrade. Survival mode reacts to threats. Strategy anticipates them. Survival mode defends. Strategy positions. And positioning is power. You're starting to understand something most never do. The very experiences that were meant to limit you built your perception. The chaos sharpened you. The betrayal refined you. The isolation strengthened you. What was meant to fracture you instead forged you. And now people are beginning to notice. They can't quite explain it. They just know something about you feels different, more grounded, more controlled, more deliberate, and deliberate people are hard to outmaneuver. But this isn't the final stage, because awareness and discipline are only tools. The real question now is, what are you going to build with them? You survived. You adapted. You mastered your internal world. But power, when left idle, stagnates, and you're not built for stagnation. You're built for evolution. And evolution doesn't stop at survival. It demands expansion. That's where we're going next. Now we step into the phase most people never reach. Expansion. Survival made you durable. Discipline made you stable. But expansion, that's where you become undeniable. Here's what changed. At first, you were just trying to stay afloat. Then you learned to stand. Then you learned to walk away from what tried to pull you under. But somewhere along the way, something unexpected happened. You stopped seeing yourself as damaged. You started seeing yourself as forged. That shift alone alters reality. Because when someone no longer identifies with their wounds, they stop making decisions from them. They stop chasing people who mirror their trauma. They stop recreating chaos because it feels familiar. They start choosing alignment over intensity, and intensity used to be your addiction, not because you loved drama, but because drama was home. Chaos felt normal. Calm felt suspicious. Peace felt temporary. But now, peace feels earned. You don't crave turbulence to feel alive anymore. You crave clarity. That's growth most people never admit they're afraid of, because clarity removes excuses. Clarity forces responsibility. And responsibility means you can't blame the past for every future decision. You've reached a place where you understand something dangerous. Your past explains you. It does not control you. Read that again internally. Explains, not controls. That realization gives you leverage, because now when anger rises, you recognize its source. When fear whispers, you identify its origin. When doubt creeps in, you trace it back to conditioning. And instead of being possessed by those emotions, you analyze them. That's power. Emotional intelligence born from trauma isn't softness. It's precision. You know how people operate when they're insecure. You know how manipulation sounds when disguised as concern. You know how jealousy masks itself as advice. You've studied the mechanics, and now you move differently. Not louder, not more aggressive, just sharper. Your conversations are intentional. Your commitments are selective. Your trust is earned. And your silence, strategic. There's something terrifying about someone who doesn't need to announce their growth. Because real growth doesn't seek applause. It seeks impact, and impact doesn't always make noise. Sometimes it's a room going quiet when you enter. Sometimes it's someone stumbling over their words because your presence disrupts their confidence. Sometimes it's former critics watching you carefully, recalculating. You don't chase attention anymore. Attention comes because stability attracts curiosity. People are trying to figure you out. You're not as emotionally accessible as before. Not because you're closed, but because you're filtered. You're no longer available for energy that drains you. And here's the deeper layer. You're not trying to prove anyone wrong anymore. That chapter closed. Proving people wrong is still reaction-based. You've moved beyond reaction. Now you're building. Quietly, strategically, intentionally. You're investing in your mind. You're refining your habits. You're strengthening your body. You're aligning your environment. You're constructing a version of yourself that isn't just resilient, but formidable. Formidable doesn't mean cruel. It means capable. Capable of walking away, capable of standing alone, capable of choosing long-term gain over short-term ego relief. Most people never develop that. They stay trapped in cycles of emotional impulse. But you broke the loop. That's generational disruption. Because when one person in a bloodline becomes conscious, everything shifts. The patterns stop with them. The inherited fears lose authority. The excuses expire. And that kind of transformation echoes, even if nobody acknowledges it. Even if nobody applauds it, even if nobody understands it, you understand it. And that's enough. But here's where it gets darker. Growth isolates, not because you're superior, but because elevation changes altitude. You can't breathe the same air anymore. Conversations that once felt stimulating now feel shallow. Connections that once felt necessary now feel optional. You're not rejecting people. You're outgrowing dynamics, and that can be lonely. But loneliness at this level isn't emptiness. It's preparation. Preparation for rooms that match your frequency. Preparation for opportunities that require stability. Preparation for influence that demands integrity. You're no longer just surviving environments. You're preparing to shape them. That's the shift. From reaction to influence. From endurance to impact. From surviving generations of dysfunction to redefining what your name represents. And this is where the real question becomes unavoidable. If you survived what destroys generations, if you dismantled inherited chaos, if you mastered your internal world, then who are you becoming now? Because survival was just phase 1, discipline was phase 2, expansion is phase 3. But the final stage, that's identity. And identity determines legacy. And legacy doesn't ask for permission. Now we arrive at the final layer, identity, not the identity that was handed to you, not the one shaped by dysfunction, not the label given by people who only knew a fragmented version of you. The identity you chose, because that's the real transformation. Most people inherit a name and spend their entire lives defending it. You rebuilt yours, piece by piece, thought by thought, decision by decision. You stopped asking, why did this happen to me? And started asking, who do I become because of this? That question changed everything. Identity isn't what you survived. It's what you decided to carry forward. You could have carried resentment. You could have carried vengeance. You could have carried the same instability that shaped your early environment. But you didn't. You carried awareness. You carried discipline. You carried discernment. And now you carry something even rarer, self-authorship. You are no longer reacting to a script written by someone else. You are writing. And when someone becomes the author of their own internal narrative, control shifts permanently. Think about what that means. No one can guilt you back into a role you've outgrown. No one can shame you into shrinking again. No one can intimidate you with tactics that once worked, because your identity is no longer negotiable. It's anchored. That's what surviving generational destruction really gave you. Not just resilience, not just emotional intelligence. It gave you clarity about who you refuse to be, and clarity about who you are building. That's power most people never touch. They operate from fragmented identities, half-shaped by childhood wounds, half-shaped by external validation. They oscillate between insecurity and ego, between people-pleasing and rebellion. You don't oscillate anymore, you align. There's a difference. Alignment means your actions match your values, your words match your boundaries, your presence matches your intention. And when alignment becomes consistent, something shifts in the external world. Opportunities change, relationships change, the way people approach you changes, because your energy isn't chaotic anymore. It's stable. Stability is intimidating in a world addicted to drama. You don't overreact, you don't overshare, you don't overextend, you choose. And choosing instead of reacting is the ultimate freedom. But here's the deeper layer most won't see. You didn't just heal for yourself. You altered a trajectory. The patterns that were normalized before you, they don't continue through you. The emotional immaturity that was excused before you, it doesn't survive in your presence. The chaos that once defined your environment, it doesn't dictate your future. You became the interruption, and interruptions create new timelines. That's legacy. Legacy isn't loud, it's structural. It's the invisible shift that changes what becomes acceptable in your world moving forward. You raised your standard, and standards, once raised, don't easily lower. You don't tolerate what you used to beg for. You don't chase what you used to fear losing. You don't shrink to maintain access. You don't perform to secure approval. You simply exist fully integrated, the child who endured, the version who questioned, the version who broke down, the version who rebuilt. They're not separate anymore. They're unified. That's why you feel different now, not perfect, not invincible, but integrated. Integration is the final evolution of survival. You didn't erase your past. You absorbed it. You extracted the lessons. You discarded the poison, and you kept the strength. Now when someone looks at you and asks, how did you survive that? You don't need to explain, because survival is no longer your identity. It's your foundation. Who are you now? You're composed under pressure. You're observant in chaos. You're intentional with your energy. You're disciplined with your reactions. You're selective with your trust. You're strategic with your silence. And you're calm in a way that unsettles people who still live in emotional turbulence. That calm isn't emptiness. It's control. control over your impulses, control over your direction, control over the story you're writing next. You survived what destroys generations, but you didn't stop at survival. You evolved. You disrupted cycles. You mastered yourself, and now you don't just walk through rooms. You alter them. You don't just exist in systems. You redefine them. You don't just carry a name. You reshape what that name means, and that's the final answer. You are not the product of generational destruction. You are the proof that it ends. And when something ends with you, something powerful begins after you.